The Life Coaching Toolbox Podcast is brought to you by Joeel and Natalie Rivera of Transformation Academy. In this episode, Joeel talks about how emotions work, the biology and psychology of emotions. This episode is one of 11 episodes in a series about coaching your clients to develop emotional intelligence and master their emotions.
Our brain is a powerful tool that is designed to be efficient and to protect us. However, there are parts of it that may be a little outdated in today's society, as we do not experience the same threats as we once did. So in this section, we will give you a basis psychological foundation of some of our emotions and the way that the body responds. So let's get started. The first one is the saber-tooth effect. So we have a fight or flight response that is designed to save our cave-dwelling ancestors from premature death in the jaws of a saber-toothed predator. However, in today, we don't have the same threats, and we're in the top of the food chain. But we still recognize some of these symptoms of fight or flight in other ways that they're triggered. For example, somebody cuts us off in front of traffic, or something happens at work, or we're just stressed out with something that's happening with our kids in school. And you might actually recognize this because what tends to happen is that you have an increased heart rate, your blood pressure goes up, you increase oxygen to the brain, and you increase your muscle tension. You might even feel a boost of energy supplies without having to drink any coffee. At the same time, there's also other things that are happening that the Mayo Clinic has pointed out that are out of the surface, and you might not even notice that they're happening. For example, your altered immune system response, your digestive system is suppressed because really you don't need to be digesting food when you're trying to run away from something that's trying to eat you and make you its food. You also have a suppressed reproductive system and growth because if something's trying to kill you, you're trying to focus on that priority instead of trying to save the species as a whole. And according to the National Institute of Mental Health, there are other systems that you might also be familiar with. This includes lack of appetite, heartburn, nausea, and stomach pain. And that's why you see some individuals, and we'll talk more about digestion as we go along, but you'll see some individuals when they feel a little anxious or they're in that fight or flight response, they might have a stomach ache or they might feel nauseous and things like that. There are chemicals that are also being released in these situations and hormones, such as adrenaline and cortisol. And these are released to save our lives, and they're supposed to return back to normal after the situation that threatened our lives. And in our modern world, our bodies do not normalize because our stress is not caused by a threat of death. For us, everything looks like a toothed predator. Our stress is constant. We're in a perpetual state of fight or flight. Therefore, this prolonged stress can lead us to breaking down physically and mentally. You got to keep in mind that when you're in that state, it's almost like if your body's exercising, but exercising all the time. So imagine if you were exercising all the time. What would that do to your mind and your body if you actually never give it time to rest? So let's look at some of the key parts of our brain. See, our brain has a part that's called the limbic system. This system houses some of the critical parts in our own emotions. For example, the amygdala, which is responsible for feeling of anxiety and fear. Many times, when this part of the brain is activated because of an experience we may have, it tunes out another part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. This area helps us reason and critically think. This is why when we get angry or anxious, we may react in ways that when we reflect back later on, we may question, what were we even thinking at that time? Why would I say that? Or why would I do that? There has been numerous studies that have shed light on what is the difference between someone that's emotionally resilient and those that are not. One of the strongest indicators is our connection between the left prefrontal cortex, which we'll call PFC, and the amygdala. So the PFC is critical because it tells the amygdala that it needs to quiet down by sending inhibitory signals. So it helps our negative emotions subside and go away. It tells it, you need to really stop because you need to stop feeling this way, or it's not rational, or it's not practical. So it really quiets us down. Studies have shown that people who have a weaker connection between these two areas of the brain have more difficulties managing and regulating their emotion. So now, you may be thinking, what if that area of my brain is not well developed? Am I out of luck? The good news is that you're not, and that you can help build those connections. It is important to keep in mind that the brain is like a muscle, and that by working those areas, you can strengthen your connections. One of the ways that you can work out that section is through mindfulness meditation. You do this by becoming an observer of your thoughts without judging them. You're looking at it and saying, okay, that's what you're thinking, that's what you're processing, and so on and so on. But by doing this, you're observing how the brain can easily exaggerate a situation and go on unnecessary tangents. And by doing this, you're activating your PFC, which is a critical part of your brain to manage your emotions. So in other words, you're training it. You're building that muscle up in your brain to let it know it's time to turn on. Reasoning and critical thinking, activate. It's almost like turning on a light switch. Therefore, you are practically working out your brain so it can learn how to turn on those areas that during challenging times and naturally assesses a thought without letting it consume you. Studies have also found that people that have a positive set point have an active PFC as well as nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is part of the brain that's associated with pleasure and a sense of reward and motivation. People that tend to be negative have fewer neural connection between these two areas of the brain. It is believed that this area can be reached through conscious thought. If this is true, you may ask then, does that mean that I will not be able to change my emotional set point? However, that is not necessarily the case. There are ways that you can indirectly work out those connections in your brain. For example, in our current society, we are consistently stimulated by immediate rewards and we constantly seek it. For example, do you constantly check your phone, play mobile games, or go to your social media to find out what's going on? That can actually be bad for this part of your brain because these habits can be addicting, do not help build that part of your brain because you're not learning that self-control. That's actually that muscle that's helping me build it. So what does help us? The first thing is planning and using your imagination to see what you want to create in the future and practicing self-control. Therefore, you can plan some of your activities. You can even plan some of your rewards that you're going to get once you achieve certain goals and things like that. I'll give you an example. If you have a habit of constantly checking your phone, you can force yourself not to check it until you reach a goal or finish some work that you're supposed to be doing instead. And by doing this, again, you're building that muscle. So by practicing self-restraint, you're actually building that emotional part of yourself that will help you not only short-term, but actually long-term when you're faced with adversities, when you're faced with stress, when you're faced with challenges, because it's going to help light up that part of your brain that's going to tell your brain, okay, you need to slow down before you react. You need to slow down before you actually take the next step, and let's process this. Just keep in mind that with everything, it takes practice and consistency.
Visit transformationacademy.com/toolbox to download free life coaching worksheets that go with the activities discussed in this podcast, plus other resources for creating a thriving life coaching business.